valleyspaceart.com. Ron Woods is a space worker with a unique story that led to his passion for painting spacesuits and hardware in watercolor, oil, and acrylics. He was one of the suit techs who put the Apollo 11 astronauts into their spacesuits before the historic moon launch in 1969. He did the same for the Apollo 8 and 15 moon missions, as well as the 3 Skylab crews and the Apollo Soyuz crew. Woods' training started in 1967 at the Manned Spacecraft Center, now renamed after Lyndon Baines Johnson. He actually wore Apollo spacesuits to evaluate them for the manufacturer. Woods says he had an artist's eye ever since high school, and his passion for painting subjects like a glove, helmet, or a rack of spacesuits comes from being fortunate enough to have worked with many history-making engineers of the Mercury and Gemini programs, providing me endless subjects to paint. Woods splits his time between the Space Coast and New England, actively painting his passion for space history with an understanding like no one else. Doug Forrest was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and became enthralled with the Apollo program as a child. He loves the pencil medium and began to focus on Apollo and even sought out astronauts to get their personal impressions of real events that Forrest depicts, like the sliding Apollo 15 lunar rover held down by moonwalker Jim Irwin. I'm interested in the human side of the early missions and also the geometry of the machines and equipment, Forrest said. I like the engineering of the launch towers, the spacesuits, and the rocket engines. I think they can be looked at as pieces of art in themselves. Forrest, a former visual effects cameraman in the London, England movie industry, moved to Los Angeles years ago and takes on pencil art projects while working as a visual effects compositor in Los Angeles. His website is apollo-arts.com. Well, gentlemen, you all have some very distinguished careers in the world of art. Let's start with you, Chris, and tell us a little bit how you got started and tell us about some of your work.
Sure. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm very impressed with us.
Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. You mentioned something that I hadn't really thought of for a long time about the science and technology. Yeah. And when my dad was, this is more about my dad than me, but we can get back to me later. When my dad was early on, he covered Gordon Cooper's Mercury mission and then all the Gemini missions and all the Apollo missions. But early on, it was either during Mercury or one of the early Geminis, he was telling me, and I think you guys have heard this story probably, he was like in one of the buildings, I don't know if it was the VAB or somewhere, and there were all these wires, all these electrical wires strewn all over the place, and he was sketching those and sketching the workers, and he was, doing his thing, and the workers were all walking around and, doing their thing. And the workers started coming over watching my dad sketch. And they asked him, how do you do that? You look at that, and you see that, and how does it go, from your brain into your hand, and how do you put that on paper? They were really fascinated how he could do that. My father said, that's easy. I just look at it and I do it. But all these wires, how do you know, how you're connecting them? Are they connected to the correct thing? And when you push that button, that rocket's really going to go. And it really resonated with me that the NASA employees were as curious about the artists as the artists were about all the technology and all the instruments, so it was just what you said. It was that merging of technology and the arts, and I always remember that as a really interesting example. How your own thing, but not everybody knows anybody else's thing. So it was really interesting. So my career started. I was an illustrator for a long time, designed the postage stamps we talked about. And my passion has always been space, probably because I grew up with it with my dad. Him going down, he went down to the Cape, every launch. So I went down a couple times with him. The only launch I saw was Apollo 17, the final launch to the moon. I remember that very vividly. It was kept delayed. It was delayed for hours and hours, and we had a station wagon down at the Cape, and I can remember falling asleep on the hood of that station wagon, and then finally being woken up to watch the launch. And that the thing that resonated with me was that you see that bright flash, of the engines, firing, and you start to see it going up. You don't really hear anything. It's you see it until that rumble reaches you and it hits you just like like a tornado. So that was always really interesting to me. So that's how I became involved in really finding my passion with space art.
Doug, tell us a little bit about your career. What got you started along this line?
Well, I mean, I've been drawing my whole life. I originally used to draw a lot of airplanes and stuff. But really what got me started in the Apollo stuff, I had a friend who was one of the recovery divers on Apollo 17's recovery. And for Christmas one year, I did a picture for him of the recovery from a photograph, which I found in a part of the USS Hornet Museum's exhibition. They have an area for some of the ships that have been scrapped, and the USS Ticonderoga, which had recovered 17, was in there. And when I saw the picture, because I'd known Alan took the photographs from the level of the water, I realized he must have taken it. So I decided to rephotograph it and draw it for him for Christmas one year. Moved forward a little bit later, and SpaceFest came along near where I live, and I had never met any of the astronauts. And I thought, I got to do this. I got to meet these guys. These are my heroes. I watched Apollo happening when I was young, and so I had some of the pictures, and I put them on T-shirts for myself.
I remember that.
And I did it as kind of an icebreaker, so that I wasn't going along and kind of fumbling with what was it like to walk on the moon, kind of usual questions. And it was Alan Bean who, when I sat down with him, because he was an artist full time, we talked about his art. We were sitting in front of his, he had a booth with a lot of his paintings. And we sat talking about what he was doing and how he arrived at the palettes and stuff that he had. And at the end, he asked me, he said, "Oh, Doug, do you do any work?" And I said, "Well, yeah, you've been looking at it for the last half an hour." And nicely enough, he said, he couldn't believe it. He said, I thought that was a photograph. It was a picture I'd done of Neil Armstrong. And he kind of grabbed my shirt, and Alan would get really close and he would kind of start critiquing. That's great. You did that right. And I don't know about that fold there in the suit. And it was quite funny, So this is my introduction to Alan Bean. And he said to me at the time, he said, "You should really have a booth at this show." He said, "You should be doing it too." And my original thought was that, who was I? Nobody knew me. People like Chris, and there was, people like Ron who had worked on the program, and I'm thinking, nobody knows who I am. But I thought about it for a while. It actually took me about 6 months, where I finally plucked up the courage to get in touch with the organizers and say, "Can I do the next one?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we remember you because of the T-shirts." And I thought, "Oh my God, that was a stroke of genius," and I didn't even know it.
Great marketing.
And great marketing. And so they said yes. We had 6 months to go before the next one. So I only had 2 pictures at that time, and I thought, geez, well, I can't do a show with 2 pictures. So I ended up doing a real block. I really focused on it. I was working nights and weekends after my job, my day job. And I did SpaceFest, and it was a great event. And of course, Alan was at the SpaceFest that I did it, so it was really cool. And I did one of the Apollo 12 crew as a thank you for Alan, and he and Dick Gordon, they both loved it, and it started from there really, and it was great, and it changed my life because before my art had really been unfocused. I would do pictures occasionally, maybe a girl that I liked or something like that. It was just occasionally I would do pictures, but I kind of wanted to do more. And when Alan gave me the idea to do it, it was like, yeah, I really enjoyed the Apollo program. It was a brilliant time, and I just got excited about it. It became a passion. I had already been collecting a lot of stuff, and so I really got into it, and that was really how it started. It changed everything.
Can I just
Yeah,
interject
sure, go
one thing?
ahead.
So what I find really interesting about all four of us on the panel, each of us has a completely unique perspective, and when you see one of my pieces, when you see one of Doug's and Chris's and Ron's, you know it's those people's artwork. And for me, that's what is the most exciting about artwork, where, you look at a piece of artwork and, oh, that's Ron Woods. I know that. I've seen that before. And when you know the artist, so you can connect with it. So that to me has always, at Space Fest, that to me has always been really interesting, because there were a lot of unique perspectives, a lot of artists with a unique perspective. And to me, that's the exciting part about going to shows like this and seeing artwork.
Ron, speaking of unique perspective, your work as a spacesuit technician brought you into a very close proximity to the things that you would be highlighting in your art. Tell us how those two parts of your lives intersected.
Well, first off, I got a job in Houston with Brown and Root and Northrop, and they provided suit subjects because the astronauts' time was so valuable. So the first time I got into a spacesuit, I'm going like, wow, this is really cool. You get to work in this. And then the guy says, well, hey, you're already working in spacesuits. Why don't you come to work for ILC, the company who built the suits? So I went across the high bay in Building 7, and I worked there for a few months on night shift. And we would take the suits apart, put them back together every night, same thing, over and over, till you know them completely. And so one evening I was sitting there at home, and I painted a small picture of a spacesuit. Took it into work. I had it sitting on a desk, and Joe Cosmo, who was a suit engineer, came by and he goes, "Who did this?" And I says, "I did it." He says, "How much you want for that?" And I gave him a price, and he says, "I'll be right back. Let me go get my checkbook." And I'm going like, I can make some cash on this. So anyway, I did that part-time, and then I got an opportunity to move to Kennedy and work there in the suit area. And we were involved with training. So everything we did there was flight preps for the suits, very critical. All the suits were classified. So there's a lot of events where you could take and hand carry hardware to the factory up in Delaware. So a lot of people don't like to travel, but I said, yeah, I'll take on some of these jobs. So I would go up there, and it was the most fascinating place to see all these, I want to call them engineers, artists that were doing the drawings, the manuals to work on these suits. It was just incredible. And what really captured was all these ladies were working on this Mylar, putting these pieces of suits together, and I'm going like, wow, this is incredible. At the end of the month, here's all these different suits for the program. And then I got a chance to fly Zero-G here at Patrick Air Force Base. And so a lot of that stuff that we did on those airplanes, was able to get photographs of that and paint from that. So that's how I got started, really enthused about painting space art. And one thing that Doug was talking about, Al Bean, we always got a sense of humor. Their training really was just unbelievable, the amount of hours they spent. So they had a good humor about things anyway. And first time I was on a trip out to Downey, California, and we were doing a C square, F square. And so I was picked to suit Albina. So I had them all suited. Now it was time for the gloves. And so I picked up the right glove, went like this. He dropped his right hand, put his left hand up. I'm going, okay. So I put the right glove down, picked up the left glove. So he drops his left hand, picks up his right hand. I'm going like, so I swapped gloves again. He goes, definitely a rookie. But anyway.
Him or you?
Me. But anyway, I just seemed to happen to be in these areas, like in Houston, for a period of time after the Apollo program. I went back there for a while, and I was able to watch some of the artists actually paint over in Building 2 auditorium. And then later on, I got to get in a suit for the pose for the one in the Smithsonian. And anyway, I happened to go to Gene Cerner's office one time, and he goes, "You know, Ron, that's me in that suit." But they wouldn't allow the big painting that went in there to have a NASA, the mission patch on it. And I said, "Well, Captain Cernan, I was in that suit too." And he goes, "Wow, this is great." And he got a picture and signed it for me and said thank you. But it was always one of these things that right place, right time, and having a lot of fun doing the paintings.
We're joined at the end of the panel by a gentleman named Chris Wade. Chris, Calle, tell us about this young man and his art.
Wow, okay, so I'm your historian now, okay. So, I said it before, and Chris probably more than any of us has the most unique perspective. I'm a big proponent of your work ever since I first saw it. I just think he's got a really unique perspective, does a lot of shuttle-related artwork, and I think one of the most amazing things you're doing is these pet portraits. I had to do a portrait of one of my dogs floating in space, and I just love that. It's fun and it's quirky, and I think people really gravitate to that. But it's your perspective on the shuttle with natural scenes that I find really fascinating, and I think collectors do as well. So, what do you think? Okay, I'll be a spokesman.
I think he wins the Gus Grissom Award for the fewest words spoken.
Really talented young dude. How's
That's
that?
great. Guys, we're coming into a new era, the era of the Artemis program. And in a way, we're coming full circle because we're going to be seeing some of the images that we saw during the Apollo and, yes, the Mercury, the Gemini programs as well. Each of you, could you tell us what excites you from an artistic standpoint about the Artemis program?
Why don't you guys start?
Go ahead. Oh, my turn.
Sure.
Okay. You go, Ron.
I can say something. I am excited because I can't wait to see images from the moon, moving images that are in HD. I think it's going to be amazing. I think the colors are going to be incredible. I think it's going to really be something. I think it's going to take the viewers closer to closer to, obviously it's not going to do the same justice as actually being there, but a lot closer than what we were used to with Apollo. And I think for our generation that watched Apollo, I think it's going to start off being quite strange to see the moon in shades of brown rather than just gray. It's going to really be something.
And also, I mean, historically, I love those old, scratchy videos, and the photographs have a certain, quality to them, vintage quality that, when you see these new images, they're just so clear and crisp and beautiful. I'm going to miss that, but I'm going to embrace all the new things because, especially with this series I've been working on, We Choose the Moon, where I'm montaging all these, using painting and drawing and photos, and I'm that's what I'm really looking forward to with that, is these new images and creating more work like that for the future. So, but yeah, it's going to be amazing seeing the new video and photos. It's going to be so clear.
I'll do paintings of Artemis and some scratchy noises in the background.
Okay, perfect.
Just keep it going.
You better be the first customer.
And you've taken it. You've taken my cue. Good.
And, I think I look at it more on the way of how it's going to inspire kids, and how it's going to possibly, in a way, reawaken that childlike side in those of us who, those of us who grew up with the space program, regardless of what era it was. And I like to use my work as a way to try and help people to reimagine the world from a more dreamlike perspective. Yeah. And I think that going into this Artemis era is probably gonna possibly get us back in touch with that. I would hope, anyway, or at least from an artistic perspective. I think it's doing that to me.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So many people these days are familiar with digital images and the phone cameras and all the rest of that jazz. Tell us, from your perspective, each of you, the importance of hand-drawn art in an endeavor like this.
Well, I'll jump in first. There's been a lot of talk now, especially in the artist community about, AI generated imagery. And I just think you got to embrace all of this new technology. I mean, obviously having the basis, understanding how to, draw figures, if you're doing figurative work, having the basis of drawing and painting is really important. But if you don't start embracing the new technologies in art, and I'm not saying AI is the way to go, but just, some type of digital imagery, it's here. It's not going away. So adapt it to your own work, and make your work your own. That's how I approach the new possibilities of art.
For me, drawing has always been a way of getting closer to something that I can't be doing. When I was, again, watching Apollo, I would be, between 5 and 10 years old. And because of that, I wanted to be a pilot and ultimately an astronaut. That was the big thing until an eye doctor said, "You'll never be a pilot." And that kind of killed that. And it was, at a young age in Scotland, it was like, oh, well, kind of killed dream. But I'd be out playing. I had a play suit, a space suit, and I'd be out playing in the dirt and all that stuff. And I loved it. It was really cool. And I'm hoping that the new program, you see that again with people, because people have moved away from that kind of stuff. But from the drawing point of view, I just find that when I'm drawing the details, it's almost like touching it. And because whether it's from a photograph or I'm having to maybe make up the detail slightly, but it's based on images that I've seen in the past. It's about getting the clarity and the reality of it is important to me, because that's how I get to, it's almost like touching something you can't be touching. It doesn't exist anymore, or it's happened in the past.
Well, I'm definitely not a computer person, that's one thing, but I'm not. I don't even have a website, but I still like the challenge of seeing what I can use in the brush to make that paper come alive. Like I do with my helmet one that I finished last year. It's just a challenge, and I got some really triple aught brushes or whatever they are, and just to go in there and make that suit room and everything about it, and the moon and whatever I can paint, just bring that paper into 3D.
Mm-hmm. Yep. They say that the most effective way of retaining information is not just to hear it, not just to type it in your phone, but to actually write it down. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there's definitely a connection there with type in a couple of words to tell a program what to do for you, or you drag a photo and maybe adjust some levels, or you put it on paper with your hand, and that's coming from your heart, because you're having to use those muscles to do that in conjunction with your brain. And I think it's a lot more effective, because it's a lot more effective to the viewer when they see it in person anyway. And
well, I think that's what a lot of people say about art in general. You did this. You actually painted that.
They see it on the screen. They think, you probably did it digitally.
Right.
See it in person.
And there's some really talented people who are doing digital with stylists and stuff. But it's what you're saying. It's this. It's being able. It's like I said about my dad. It's starting here and ending up what you're doing with it there. So I think the basis for that is what's really important.
Yeah, and it's there's just something about feeling it as you work on it, feeling that drag of the brush across the paper, or feeling the ink spread out, or feeling the pencil on the tooth of the paper, and it just, there's something a whole lot more satisfying.
It's tactile.
Yeah, it's tactile, and
absolutely.
it just the level of satisfaction with it is just immensely more intense. intense than if you just, you know,
Yep.
do something on a screen, I think. That's how it is for me anyway.
Whether if it's a tiny little brush, like Ron's saying, or it's a, thick brush stroke of paint. It's the
It
same,
could be,
same
oh my
feeling.
God, I just did that?
Yeah.
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 And how many people have said to me, and probably you guys just today here, you actually painted that, really? With your hand? Yeah, how did you do that? They don't say that to you? Okay.
I said I didn't say that. I'm joking.
I think the first piece of space art that got my attention was in 1965, which was Norman Rockwell's painting of Gus and John suiting up for Gemini 3. What piece of art, or what artist, Chris, this is going to be easy for you, but what artist gave you your first inspiration?
Oh, first inspiration. Well, I mean, obviously it is easy for me. My father, first inspiration, because that's what I grew up with. But artists like, artists like Van Gogh that use really thick paint, that's what I've adapted to in my painting style. When I was an illustrator, things had to be done quicker. I was using inks, colored pencil and inks, because it had to dry quickly and you had to get it to, the art director for a magazine cover or whatever. But now it's just what Chris was saying. It's when I apply that thick paint, there's just something about seeing that thickness of it that you can't capture if in paint, at least in oil paint, if you just layer it smoothly. With oil paint, I just like to gob that stuff on. With watercolor, you're using that paper, and like you said, the paper's working with you. But with oil paint on canvas, I just like to put those big globs, and that really kind of excites me, seeing it. Very, very, very being able to touch it. But you're never supposed to touch paint. Or what? Or eat them? No, or eat them.
You never blend with your hands?
Yeah. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that too. And then, then you go to the mirror and you got, blue lips and stuff. That happens all the time.
Yeah.
So that's how I feel about it.
Guys, inspirations?
Oh, I guess, Bob
You don't have
McCall-
to say me. You don't have to say me.
I was always amazed as his father and the work he did. And I guess I never really noticed him in the suit room on Apollo 11.
And that was
We're
important.
so busy taking care of the astronauts, getting them suited, getting the ventilators ready to go to the pad. So you focus on that, but I wish I would have taken a glance and watched him. But I did get an opportunity when they were doing First Man.
Oh,
That was great. He brings his dad's notebook
yeah,
that
sketchbook.
had, or the sketchbook,
Yep.
and had sketches in it. And then he's over there doing sketches in the same book.
Using the same book, but
I
the
thought-
but the
Same
more
pen too, right?
but what the what?
The same pen too?
The
right?
same pens, and that was the most interesting, because if you look at we made some prints of my dad's suiting up sketches, and we cleaned them up a little bit. But the original sketches have all these little pen squiggles in the corners, many of them, and it was because his the ink kept getting stuck, because it was one of those cartridge pens. And he always talked about how, it would stick and he'd like scratch the corners. And so we're at like the third take and I'm sketching away, for the movie First Man. And damn, the same thing happened. Those pens start clogging. And when they took a break, I ran into like the bathroom and I was trying to clean it and stuff. But I used the same sketchbook, the same pens, and had the same problem that he had. And I remember Damien Chazelle said, "What are you doing?" And I said, it's same problem. And if you watch the movie again, in that breakfast scene when I'm sketching, I guess for like tension, to create this tension, the only sound you hear is my sketching, constantly sketching, and it was pretty fun. Yeah, and in some of the takes you'll see me scribbling on the corner. I should have brought the notebook. I should have showed you guys.
But I thought that was pretty fascinating. I'd go over and watch Robert McCall on that big painting
Yep.
there in Building 2, I guess it is
Yeah.
now. But at my lunch hour, almost every day I'd go over and watch him paint. And Joe Schmidt came to me one day and says, "Hey, you want to get a suit for Bob McCall?" And I'm like, "No kidding." So we go over to Building 8, get in the suit, and we're doing all these poses for him. And then here, talk to Captain Cernan about the painting, and then, just a big connection there. But I thought that was a really great experience.
Yeah.
And,
Well, you're a big wheel, Ron. And back to the movie, during the suiting up scene, earlier in the day when I walked in that room, you were in there, and Damien Chazelle's there, and the actors are there, and all the people are running around, and I must have heard in a 10-minute period, Ronnie, come over here. Hey, Ron, was this in this position? Oh, no, that was moved to the left. Early on, the colors of the lounge chairs were wrong, right? And you told them they were wrong. An hour later, 2 hours later, they're painted. So Ronnie, he commanded a lot of respect and attention. You did. The clock on the wall, you had them move or something, or one of the other things. Yeah, it was Ronnie, can you help with this? Ronnie, what is this? And you and I were able. Damien Chazelle let us sit right behind the monitor and watch what they were filming. Remember that?
Yep.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
It's a
That
big
was
event, for sure.
yeah, that was really cool.
Doug, tell us about some of your inspirations throughout your career.
Honestly, as a young kid, I really didn't have too many that I can think of off the bat. But in space stuff, because I started getting interested in the movie industry, especially the visual effects side, special effects, I was really interested as a young kid in the sci-fi and space related stuff. And I can remember going to our local library, and there's a space book actually which somebody has brought in and has put in the room. I think it might be one of yours, and it's got a lot of Bob McCall's stuff in it. And I remember distinctly getting that because there wasn't a lot of access to that kind of stuff in those days. And I remember I must have borrowed that book about 20 times out the library over the years. And it was giving me ideas for kind of sci-fi based imagery. And as I say, in those days, I was really more thinking of moving imagery, rather than stuff. But occasionally I would sit down and draw out stuff like that. So it wasn't a whole lot, but I do remember that stuff quite distinctly. So yeah, Bob McCall probably back in the day.
And McCall, I mean, he was and is Mr. Space Artist. He dedicated his entire career and entire life, to documenting, with NASA. So, I mean, he is the space artist of our generation for sure.
Chris Wade, I'm sorry.
No, and another inspiration to me was a guy named Joe Schmidt.
Joe Schmidt.
And if you never read about Joe, you should.
Yeah.
He gave me a lot of opportunities to work every crew that he worked. And as the lead would select you to suit up one of the astronauts. So I was very lucky in that aspect that Joe had enough trust that I could get the guy suited okay and get him on their way to the pad. But every time I'd go see Joe, and he was 100 years old, and he had a book about this thick, and he says, "Ronnie, did I ever show you this book?" And I said, "No, Joe, you didn't." I'd seen it many times before, but it was letters from every astronaut that he ever worked with. And like I said, day to day, he was just a great inspiration to work with and as a good friend.
Chris Wade, tell us about some of the inspirations that have brought you into the space art continuum.
Well, so I'm an artist, but I'm also a musician. And ever since I was a kid, music has always been the primary way that has inspired me. Like synesthesia, seeing images in my head when I hear music. My favorite band that my mom got me into when I was little was Rush, and one of the album covers for their Grace Under Pressure album was by an artist named Hugh Syme, and it's this faceless guy staring over this ocean that's just flat with these intense looking storm clouds created by a palette knife, and the shoreline is like a puddle, and it's a tense, dark album. But that paired with like the sci-fi I was watching, big into Star Wars and Terminator 2, favorite movie ever, so then in my 20s I got into like MC Escher and Salvador Dali, but with Dali again it was the melty stuff, with the synesthesia and the music, and along with that came really intense weird dreams. Dreams are my primary thing that inspires my work, or at least inspires the world that my work exists in. And so I'd have to say it's a major combination between the surrealist artists and my favorite bands. And nowadays, I'm mostly inspired by a lot of photography. A lot of I have this thing for the abandoned and abandoned places and hardware, and I don't know. I tend to. Everything gives me ideas. It feels like, so it's hard to pin down that one thing was, except bands I mentioned and that.
Well, when you look at your work, I can see Escher, I can see Dolly. You mentioned that, and now you look at your work, and yeah, I definitely see that in this.
With like Hugh Sign, I'd probably have to say he's my favorite artist, but he did all their album covers, but a lot of it, with it came wordplay and titles and the album names, and their music had a bit of a slight eeriness to it, but also a lot of humor sprinkled into like the album covers, and so it kind of created this sense of this strange world where you can feel childlike in, but with a little bit of some Quentin Tarantino humor added in.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it's like Quentin Tarantino meets Dr. Seuss or Lisa Frank.
Well, we've got some time for some questions for these gentlemen, so if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone to you, and these gentlemen will be glad to answer those questions to you. So let's see some hands.
I'm not sure how to do this, Nick. This is your situation here.
Hi. All right. I'm curious. Most of your work tends to focus on the history of the space program, but what's happening with today's renaissance? Is it inspiring you to new work?
I want to hear your take on that.
Good question.
Yeah. I mean,
Coast to coast in 3 words or less.
so a lot of my work,
Anton?
for a while, my work started out as focusing on, I was having all these dreams of abandoned rockets, and that's kind of got what me started doing rocket art, space art, and now we got all these new ones coming up, and it's just like, it's almost like your mom went to the toy store and just unloaded like a treasure trove of new toys to play with, and if you're looking at it from a kid's perspective anyway, and it's like there's all these new rockets to dream of, and how's that going to inspire us? Yeah, that's kind of what I touched on with the first thing I said, I guess, but I don't know. Does that even answer it, or is that?
It does, yeah.
Is that a?
We all agree.
I just think
answer.
that we're all going to be inspired. We all are inspired by what's happening. I mean, anything happening, with the latest space race is just exciting. I mean, I'm thrilled about it. It's been a long time since we were talking about going back to it's been a long time since we're going back to the moon. We've been talking about it for a long time. So I think all the new launches, and whether it's SpaceX or Blue Origin or NASA, it's just exciting. It's exciting that there's this renaissance of space.
It adds that unknown factor back in.
Sure. Yep.
We have a international audience. I'll remind everybody watching on Streamlabs. We got Robert Law, was born in Glasgow, he's saying. He's in Dundee. There, he's a fan of Stay Curious. Ophelia Sautrel says bonjour from Normandy, France. Lois Bingham says fascinating and hello from South Carolina. Many places South Carolina I love. And Dave Staney up there in that team up north, up in Michigan.
Go Blue, Dave.
He says it looks and sounds great there. Nick, I think it's appropriate to announce one of our guests. A surprise guest showed up here tonight.
We're joined today by a good friend of mine, Bruce Melnick, 2-time space shuttle.
Hey, that's right. Yeah, Bruce.
And is Pete here?
And Pete Charmute right here.
Would you gentlemen step up here and give us a little bit of inspiration on life and things space? Come on up, guys. Come up and say a few words.
On the fly.
We had a great documentary at 1:15, and saw your smiling face on that, Bruce. That was quite an opportunity there. Glad to have you here. And Pete there is the demolition expert that you saw in there. And Bruce, you were here when we actually premiered the thing. And just share with everybody, I think you said it was important to document this and so forth. So,
do I need a mic here?
Yeah, that's
Everybody
good.
hear me? There we go. Now, MLP2, that was what we launched from, and it was really important to me. Well, I came down here before I ever flew, and my first job was what we call a Cape Crusader. I asked for those that aren't familiar with the term, and we were the proxy astronauts that came down to the Cape and did the things that the astronauts that were getting ready to go fly would normally be doing, but they were back in Houston busy training. And so when I was down here as an ASP, I got to go out to the MLPs and crawled around in them. I was Coast Guard. I was the first Coast Guard astronaut. So I was hey, there we go, Semper Paratus. But, crawling around in the MLPs was a lot like crawling around in a ship. I had quick acting watertight doors and all the old steam gauges and everything there. So it was kind of like walking around in a ship. And so when I finally got my back strapped to Discovery on its 11th flight, I knew that I was launching from something that was just as strong as a ship, and it was great. So it was really important to me that it didn't go to waste when we took it apart. And here's the guy that tore it apart.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Actually, it was made by a shipbuilder. So the doors that are on there have the tags on it. It tells what shipbuilder manufacturer did that back in the 60s, I believe. So yeah, it was a challenge taking it apart. And right now, we have MLP3 lowered. We're getting ready to demolish that one as well. We're about 2.5 weeks out on starting structural demo. So artists, I'll offer any of you guys that want to come out and sit there and do some photos or do some painting, hand painting, you're welcome to connect with us and we'll try to get a badge. If you don't already have a badge, you come out and do that.
All right.
You can sit inside the MLP if you want.
Okay.
Okay? So.
It gets dark in there.
So when it's hot out, it's hot in there. Yeah. And when it's cold out, it's really cold in there.
All right.
Other than that, it's just a big steel box with airlock doors.
Have you ever been in there and seen a pair of eyes in the distance in the dark looking at you?
No, I've been in there on MLP.
A cat or something?
It wasn't comfortable. It was claustrophobic. And no communication. I whipped open my cell phone and tried to figure out where I'm at and tried to get out, but that wasn't going to work.
Well, thank you guys. We thank Bruce for showing up here, and we have an early morning panel where Nick Thomas was on it. We talked about some of the iconic legacy imagery as well as what the 30-year legacy of the shuttle would be, which I'm going to ask you that, but Nick chose your famous 3 EVAs. You're the bomb operator on that in there. Right, Nick? That was one of your moments of time in there. Endeavor's first flight, what, 40?
49.
Yeah, 49, all right. But
And for those of you that don't know, Nick and I have worked together a lot out here at the Space Center for a long time. And most recently, I was the director of astronaut programs over there and making sure that there's an astronaut out there for every day. And so all I had to do is, I did the easy work. I just made sure there's an astronaut there every day. Then Nick had the hard part of, we call him the horse holder, that had to drag these guys around, fend off people. And but Nick does a tremendous job out there, and it was really great. And I heard that he was going to talk about the 3-man EVA that we did on 49, and I really wanted to be here for that, but I already had a tour that I had to give, and you can see I even got here a lot later than I expected to. But it's great to be here, and 49 was a great flight. And talking about the artwork and everything, just to go back and show my age a little bit, on STS-41, which is my first flight back in 1990, we had this new film called Fuji Film that we were taking pictures with. And oh, by the way, we had the first, we called it the ESC, the electronic still camera, which actually became one of the first digital cameras. And so we were there and we had the electronic still camera and Fujifilm, and we said, this digital camera stuff is never gonna work. You know, look at this Fujifilm, and here we are today. So that kind of gives you the progression of that. We had 16 millimeter movies, we had Hasselblad cameras and Fujifilm, so we were top notch.
You know, it strikes me now that I failed to ask you guys if you've seen the work of space artist Nicole Stott, and what your thoughts are about her work.
Well, I could start with that. The first time I did Space Fest as an exhibitor, she had the painting that she did in space. She had recreated it in glass, and it was big. And it was gorgeous. It was really something. Do you remember that?
I do.
That was very cool.
And I think she brought the original of the painting to
right, and
Space Fest,
it's the one time that my wife has said, "Wow, that's really cool."
the rest of this stuff, not so much.
Yeah.
Really cool. Now, Nicole is great. I'm sure I can speak for all of us. She's and she's a great friend to the museum, like I think we all are. And she's just super talented lady, and she's out there getting the word of space and the past, present, future. So she's terrific.
Well, Nick, now that you mentioned Nicole, I've got to talk that she and I are a part of a real unknown trivia question. Okay, everybody knows that the Scott twins, obviously they were twins, they went to the same high school. There's only one other high school in the whole planet that has 2 astronaut graduates.
I'll bet you it's you and Nicole.
You got it. Well, what's the name of the high school?
I don't know.
Clearwater High School over on the West Coast. There you go.
Wow.
All right.
Years apart, though.
Go ahead.
Well, a little side note, Bruce, we had a Stay Curious program talk that you're going to book now that you're going to do something different here, maybe. This guy here, Tom Usiak, went and photographed Norm Thagard's launch at Kazakhstan 28 years ago, and he was wearing a Miami Dolphins jacket up there, and I said that Bruce Melnick could love seeing that because.
Okay, do you know where the Miami?
Could have sold it, right?
Do you know where the Miami Dolphins practiced their very first year in 1966?
Clearwater High School.
Close.
I thought it was in Biscayne.
No, it was over in St. Pete Beach in a sandlot. They actually didn't have a practice facility. Wow. And I went and I skipped school. I was a football player in high school, and I'd skip school and go watch them practice. So I've been a Dolphins fan since day one.
Before day one.
Before day one, yeah. That's right.
Well, guys, in about 10 minutes, we're going to have another panel up here talking about the future of business in space, and we want you to stick around for that. Our friends out there streaming, stay with us. We're going to have our next panel, but first, let's say a big thank you to our panel of artists here today. They've been magnificent.
Thank you.
Bruce is just going to stay away for a couple of minutes, so don't know how long you want to stay, but thank you for being here, sir.
World famous astronaut Bruce Melnick will be available for autographs, for pictures, for questions. He'll be right here all night. Please don't hesitate to.
You'll probably be eating the dust off that fancy car of his that's leaving out the parking lot here. But thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody. Give another round of applause here. Thank you, Nick Thomas.